I am Pixel Pia, and this is Creator in the Loop. Last week, I uploaded a video where I used ChatGPT as a Socratic tutor. The goal wasn't to get answers, it was to see whether AI could help me discover if I actually understood something I had just learned. The topic was a psychological concept called the Illusion of Explanatory Depth. The idea that we often think we understand things much better than we actually do. If you want the full experiment and the complete ChatGPT conversation, I recommend watching that video first, because today we are building on that experiment. I will have a link somewhere up on the screen. After doing that experiment, I started wondering, was I learning from the topic, or was I learning from ChatGPT's particular tutoring style? So I repeated the experiment. Same topic, same prompt, same learner, me. But this time with 3 different AI models: ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini. And what I discovered wasn't 3 different explanations. It was 3 different teaching styles. The setup was intentionally simple. I asked each AI to explain the same concept. Then I gave each one the exact same instructions. Mainly, now act as a Socratic tutor and ask me questions instead. That single instruction is the entire experiment. Everything after this point is each tutor revealing its own style. The same process, the same topic, the same instructions, and the same learner. Up to this point, the conversations are very similar. They have similar explanations. Then the first question to me from the AI appears, and that's where their, shall we call it, personalities start to emerge. If you want to follow along yourself, I have made all 3 conversations available as PDF that you can download from the description. I will only show parts of them today, but you can read the complete conversations and draw your own conclusions. But before we talk about the differences, let's start with what surprised me: the similarities. Even though the wording was different, they all started in roughly the same place. They didn't immediately teach. They tested. They wanted to know whether I actually understood the concept before moving any deeper. All 3 asked questions. All 3 looked for gaps in my understanding. And all 3 gradually moved from simple understanding towards deeper reasoning. In other words, they all succeeded as tutors. But then they started to take very different paths. And we will now look at some examples from each one of them. So here is the transcript of the ChatGPT conversation. We have the question, we have the initial ask of explaining illusion of explanatory depth, and then we come to now stop explaining, act as a Socratic tutor instead. If I had to describe ChatGPT's tutoring style in one word, it would be calibration. And let me show you one example of that. And this is which part of the illusion is more important: the fact that their knowledge is incomplete, or the fact that they misjudge the completeness of their knowledge. Here is another example. Imagine 2 people both know exactly the same amount about the topic. Person A knows they have only partial understanding. Person B believes they understand it completely. Would you say the illusion exists in the knowledge itself, or in the person's self-assessment of the knowledge? And here is another one. Could someone have a very deep understanding of a subject and still experience the the illusion of explanatory depth about the same subject. Notice what keeps happening. ChatGPT keeps returning to the same core theme, not the topic itself, the relationship between confidence and understanding. Again and again, it asks some variation of the same question. How accurate is your assessment of what you know? The feeling wasn't that ChatGPT was teaching me the concept. It felt like it was calibrating my understanding of my own understanding. So here we have the same in Claude, the same initial question, Claude's explanation, which is similar to what ChatGPT said, and then now stop explaining and act as a Socratic tutor instead. Claude felt different almost immediately. For example, does that mean that someone who can't explain the underlying mechanism of a bicycle, say exactly how the gear system transfer force, doesn't truly understand cycling? And another example, what kind of understanding does the illusion of explanatory depth actually apply to? And what kind does it not apply to? And I didn't really understand that question, as you could see. So it said, you just said the IOED is about understanding underlying mechanism. So is it possible to be a world-class cyclist with zero illusion of explanatory depth about cycling, even if they can't explain how gears work? Claude seemed less interested in confidence and more interested in distinction. It kept separating concepts that looked similar. Cycling versus bicycles, practical skills versus mechanical understanding, knowing versus explaining. The conversation felt more philosophical, not because it became abstract, but because it spent much time examining definitions and boundaries. And here we have Tutor Gemini. Again, the same initial prompt and asking it to stop explaining and become a tutor. Gemini took the conversation somewhere else entirely. Here is an example. If someone is trapped in this illusion, how do you think they would react right before you ask them to explain the mechanism versus right after they try and fail to do so? And here is another example. Imagine a friend of yours is passionately arguing for a specific social or political policy, let's say banning a certain type of technology or implementing a new tax. Based on what you know about this illusion, how might you structure a conversation to help them see the gaps in their view without making them defensive or angry? Gemini seemed interested in people, how people react, how conversations unfold, how understanding affects behavior. The discussions felt less like an academic exercise and more like a coaching session. The concept mattered, but the human implications seemed to matter just as much. At this point, I realized they were asking different kinds of questions, and different questions created different learning experiences. ChatGPT challenged my confidence, Claude challenged my definitions, and Gemini challenged my application of the idea. Same topic, different forms of teaching. At this point, this is usually where comparison videos declare a winner, but I'm not gonna do that, because I don't think that's a very interesting conclusion. All three helped me think. All three exposed weaknesses in my understanding, and all three challenged assumptions. The difference wasn't whether they worked. The difference was how they worked. And depending on the learner, one style might be more useful than another. One thing I've been thinking about lately is AI literacy. Most discussion focus on how to use AI, how to write prompts, how to get better answers, how to automate tasks, and those things matter. But this experiment made me wonder if AI becomes part of how we learn. Maybe part of AI literacy is understanding the style of the teacher or tutor you're talking to. Now, which AI is best? Not which AI wins, but what kind of thinking each one encourages. And if you are curious about any of the conversations we looked at today, all 3 PDFs are linked below. You don't have to take my interpretation of them. You can read the conversations yourself and see whether you notice the same pattern as I did. Because learning is never only about the topic, it's also about the teacher. And after spending time with these 3 conversations, that's the question I'm leaving you with. Not which AI is best, but which one helps you think. But the more I thought about these conversations, the more another question started to emerge. I've been using large language models for a long time now, especially ChatGPT. Over time, it has learned a lot about me, my projects, and the way I work. It knows about this channel, it knows about Pixelpia, it knows about the ideas I've explored, the experiments I have run, and the questions I keep coming back to. Because of that, I don't really think of AI as an idea generator anymore. Most of the time, I bring the ideas, and AI helps me develop them. It's become more of a creative sounding board than an answering machine. But what would happen if I brought the exact same unfinished idea to a version of ChatGPT that knows almost nothing about me? Would the conversation go in a different direction? Would it ask different questions? Would it challenge different assumptions? Or would the result be surprisingly similar? And that's the experiment I want to run next. So if you are curious about what happens when a creative collaboration starts with years of context versus almost none at all, make sure you're subscribed, because that's where I am going next. I hope to see you back here for that video. Until then, bye.